experience in developing and integrating applications with Azure Active Directory. He is currently based in Switzerland. If you happen to face any audio or video issues during the webcast or have any technical questions, please post them in the Q&A panel and our team is here to help you. Now I'd like to turn today's event over to our presenter. Johan, you have the floor now.
Hi and a great welcome to this virtual training series for managing Microsoft Teams. My name is Jochen Nickel and I will try to help you during this series to understand all the main concepts and administering options for Microsoft Teams. We will organize this course in 5 days. So at the first day we have the Microsoft Teams overview, where we get in touch with Microsoft Teams, we go through the security and compliance features in Microsoft Teams, and we get a small and smooth introduction into managing Microsoft Teams itself. On day 2 we have the complete focus on the implementation of security and governance. On day 3 we go through the upgrade from Skype for Business to Microsoft Teams. On day 4 we have a closer look for the management of the collaboration features of Microsoft Teams. On day 5 we have the management of the communication path of Microsoft Teams. So after going through course overview, we will start with the first topic, the Microsoft Teams overview. So as we already know, the digital world is advancing at an amazing speed. So to succeed as an organization, we must embrace a digital transformation. So new ways of connecting people, data and processes to create value. Microsoft Teams in specific is the hub for teamwork in the Microsoft 365 story that brings people together in a shared workplace and the workspace app, obviously, where they can chat, meet, collaborate on files and, for example, automate workflows. Microsoft Teams is also built on the security and compliance tools of Microsoft 365, which enables you to join a modern collaboration and communication together with today's complex legal and regulatory needs for businesses, for example. So the basic things what we work with the Microsoft Teams story is how we can integrate in business applications, how we store and share files, for example, how we chat and call, or better saying interact with other people inside of the organization or outside of the organization, how we can manage projects and work with groups, for example, the hosting of meetings, or to collaborate on documents and manage the whole context of the organizations. So basically Teams delivers in exactly these 4 course areas this specific digital workspace for a high-performing team. So with the 4 labels that we can say: communicate, collaborate, customize and work with confidence. Let's get an idea about these 4 core areas. For example, if we start with communicate, Teams meets specific the communication needs of a diverse workforce by providing a complete meeting and calling solution, including chat, voice and video. Teams supports instant messaging or one-on-one chats to defined groups, for example. This can be accomplished by using different clients like the Teams desktop client, a lightweight web client, but with the same feature set like the Teams desktop client, or directly on a mobile phone. It is also possible to share resources such as users, webcams and desktops while talking on a landline connection with one another. Besides direct and group chat, Teams also provides an open conversation in channels where people can share information about topics that can be commented on by other team members, for example. This is a very helpful feature set because normally if you just see the example about emailing to each other, the other people in the team don't know about this specific topic, what's in the discussion. With Teams, they are able to see the whole communication, can interact directly with it, and gives a lot of capabilities and interesting discussions and maybe new ideas for the organization itself. Basically, it's easy to move from a chat into a face-to-face meeting and share, for example, important resources to help users to bridge, for example, geographical barriers. If we think about the second point about the collaboration, with the deep integration of Teams in Office 365, Microsoft 365, we get the enablement for a multi-generational workforce to use the Office apps with all the people are familiar with, like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, SharePoint, Planner, and even Power BI, for example. And specifically in the context of Teams. So Teams brings all the Office 365 services together so that users can easily share and co-author files in the same time, and brings up a real great capability to work together on the same material, on the same hard project what the people have, for example. To see about customization is that Teams enables you integrate the different everyday work apps. So you can bring your apps into a single place for a unified work experience. So the users no longer need to jump between the different Office 365 apps, clients and services, because Teams integrates them all, both native and third-party apps and connectors, so into the whole Teams and single channel. Users can also customize their workplace with their custom apps, and Teams administrators can provide, for example, specific apps, connectors, and bots that are available across all the team members. Teams is a very extensible platform that enables you to build apps and integrate with business processes. The last point is the work with confidence point. So Microsoft Teams comes with the enterprise-grade security, compliance, and manageability that is already well known from the existing Office 365 services. By using Teams, administrators can comply with all the modern business requirements and closely control how internal and external users work together, thereby mitigating, for example, data loss and data leak. We have a lot of improvements right now during the last months in exactly this field, where we see a lot of work that Microsoft does for us to really avoid the data loss and data leakage. With Microsoft Teams, an organization or a company can leverage the whole user collaboration and communication while it's protecting their business data and interest on an enterprise scale. As we see on the following slides, Microsoft Teams lets you really quickly pull together a team with people inside and outside your organization, so that you can chat with others to drive a fast and inclusive conversation, and to securely share and co-author documents and iterate on projects, for example. With exactly this topic, we have really a great option, because we have really on every client, we have the Teams options available. With the chatting option, we really have a free field of communicate with each other inside and outside of the organization. It gives us a lot of capabilities. Also, we have a great thing to work with channels to organize our teams in an organizational structure, like, for example, sales, marketing, research and development, human resources, and such a thing. And we can build up a real great information architecture as well to put all the processes, documents, communications, and all the stuff where it needs to be, and not in another place on any computer on your organization, on a mobile, on any storage or whatever. It's all close together on the specific context you work inside of Microsoft Teams. So what are teams? Basically, we have already talked about it. It's a collection of people, content, tools, apps, surrounding all the different projects and outcomes within an organization or company. That's basically the thing what's going through. So teams can be created in different manners. So to private only, to invite specific users, to be public, or to be available into or in the specific organization. And the people can join in the various ways or are managed by the team's owner specifically. You can also designate one or more members of the team to be the owner, so that you have a great management capability who is allowed to do anything inside of a Microsoft team, for example. That gives you great capabilities, also who manages specifically the members inside of a team and such a thing. We have just two roles, that's the owner and the member role. Teams can be also dynamic for project-based work, such as running projects, for example, as well as an ongoing to reflect the internal structure, what we have seen before in the figure on the slide of your organization, maybe on departments or on office locations. All data within a team, such as conversation, files, and notes across team channels, are specifically only visible to the members of the team. And that's a great capability as well, to be isolated from the department perspective, or on the other hand, open for the whole organization if the information is needed for all the organization members, for example. Now that we know the term team, inside of Teams, we need to have a closer look on the team channels, because Teams is basically made up of channels. So channels, as we see here, enable users to organize a team into dedicated subsections for the purpose of keeping conversation organized by specific topics like events, projects, presentations, or disciplines such as a department name like marketing or engineering. Channels are where you hold meetings or to have conversations and work on specific files together inside of this exact context. At the top of channel, you will find the tabs, which are basically links to your favorite files, apps and services, for example, that you have. Files that you share in a channel on the Files tab are stored in SharePoint in the backend. So additional tabs are also available, for example, to extend channels with apps that include tabs, connectors and bots, for example. Basically, there are two types of channels that can be maintained inside of a team. The first type is the standard channel, which is visible to all the team members. So therefore they are available for conversations that everyone on a team can participate in, for example. On the other hand, we have the private channels. They are similar to a standard channel, but they restrict access to the conversations, files and apps to a limited subset of the team members. And this enables a great private collaboration within a project or department. But just a short side note on this. Private channels currently support only connectors and tabs, but without stream, planner or forms tabs. And they don't support messaging extensions and bots. That's a main important information you should know on that. As well, here you can see an organizational structure in this slide, so that we have different organization, different teams, or different projects. What we can talk about how you want to organize your Microsoft Teams experience itself. Next, we will take a closer look on what is a chat. Basically, Teams provide an instant messaging feature that enables team members to send messages in real time for live collaboration. Chat is possible between single users and with multiple participants of a team, or obviously even with external users. In addition, a simple chat can instantly be extended with desktop sharing and voice communications if it's needed. So it's a very helpful tool in a modern work scenario, that you're just chatting with a member of your organization. Oh, I just want to show you my screen or anything like that, or I want to jump to a voice communication because it's getting more complicated or is a lot to write for it. It's a great experience for a modern work style. So when users join a chat, they can basically send messages that include files, links, emojis, stickers and GIFs. There are also many formatting options for chat messages, including options for specific highlighting, font size, lists and many more things. The main thing is also that guests can also participate in conversations, but in specific with a limited access. So basically, in summary, Microsoft Teams provides all the several benefits of Office 365 services and tools in one application. So it is the new collaboration hub that combines the features of Exchange mailboxes, SharePoint site collections and Skype for business communication, among others, while simultaneously meeting security and compliance requirements. After getting the first impression about what is Teams, what is it for, we will take a better look on the Teams architecture. As we can see on the slide, we have different interaction with basic Office 365 services. As we already know that multiple Office 365 services have been combined together to provide the unified communication and collaboration hub experience of Microsoft Teams. One main thing is that the basis of all is the Microsoft 365 group, which was formerly called Office 365 group. Microsoft 365 groups is the cross-application membership service in Office 365. So the prerequisite for any team is a Microsoft 365 group that provides collaboration for a set of people, and that is enhanced with instant messaging and voice capabilities, as well as wide application integration and automation features, for example. Therefore, to understand the Teams architecture, you as an administrator need to know what Microsoft 365 groups are and what they consist of. So, because they are a foundation to interconnect the Office 365 services for Teams. Microsoft 365 groups are related to traditional Active Directory groups, let's say. But while AD groups serve permission management and message distribution purposes only, Microsoft 365 groups are built for collaboration of teams and not suited for granular permission management. They support two types of members, basically owners and members, and the owners can manage the group settings and membership, while the members can participate with the group resources and, for example, subscribe to updates. Basically, a Microsoft 365 group is an object in Azure Active Directory with a list of members and a loose coupling to related workloads, including a SharePoint team site, Jammer group, a shared Exchange mailbox resources, Planner, Power BI and OneNote, as we already see on the slide. You can add or remove people to the group just as you would any other group-based security object in Active Directory. Specifically, the following resources are included in a Microsoft 365 group: a hidden shared Outlook inbox, a hidden shared calendar, a SharePoint document library, a Power BI workspace, a team if the group was created from Teams, a planner if the group was created from Planner, Jammer if the group was created from Jammer, obviously, and specifically roadmap if the project for the web is licensed, for example. The Teams integration with Microsoft 365 groups provides features to enhance the existing collaboration services and features of a Microsoft 365 group with, for example, additional communication services such as a persistent chat-based workspace like Channels Chat and voice like conferencing and PSTN calling. So you can create a new team which also creates a Microsoft 365 group, or you can enable a Microsoft 365 group with Microsoft Teams. Teams in specific adds several new features to a Microsoft 365 group. For example, chat capabilities for one-to-one and one-to-n instant messaging, standard channels for open communication and collaboration between all the team members, private channels for a secure communication and collaboration for a subgroup of team members, a dedicated SharePoint document library for any standard and private channel, a tab integration to a unified client experience, the integration of apps, native, third-party, or any line of business apps into a unified client, and last but not least, an activity feeds for easy. So that's a great option what we have specifically with this Teams architecture that combines all the Office 365 services, and on top we gather more features with the Teams integration itself. After taking a look to the different architecture components of Microsoft Teams, we also need to have a closer look to the identity and data storage field. The Microsoft Teams approach supports all identity models that are available with Microsoft 365. The first is the cloud identity, where the user just lives only in the cloud, in Azure AD specifically. The synchronized identity, which is based on an on-premise Active Directory that's synchronized to Azure Active Directory. And the third point, the federated identity model, which requires also a synchronized identity where the user password is specifically verified by the on-premises identity provider, like Active Directory Federation Services ADFS. On the other hand, we have to take a closer look on the Teams data storage. Specifically, data in Teams resides on the geographic region associated with your tenant. So currently Teams supports, for example, Australia, Canada, France, India, Japan, South Africa, South Korea, United Kingdom, Americas, APAC, and the EMEA regions. So basically the key data types are stored in various locations when the data is not in an active use, for example. We had already a discussion about different services, and we see now that we need to have a closer look on the service dependencies. Because Microsoft Teams utilizes the services of 365 to provide the collaboration and communication capabilities that were already well known before Teams existed. So when you create a team on the backend, you are creating a Microsoft 365 group and the associated SharePoint document library and OneNote notebook. Along with it ties into other Office 365 cloud applications. For example, Teams uses Exchange Online to send, receive and distribute emails. It stores data processed by the chat service that are built on Skype for Business. And the voice services such as conferencing for meetings and PSTN calling are consumed from Skype. And files are stored and processed through SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business. The diagram shows the existing dependencies from Teams to the traditional Office 365 services. So these complex dependencies result obviously in different types of data that's produced by the different workloads that were acquired for user productivity. Because not all types of data are efficiently stored in a single storage location, Teams uses the most effective storage location depending on the user data that is produced by each service. Let's imagine about a message. So a chat service table storage is used and in the future is moving to a Cosmos DB. So an image, for example, is based on a media service on Azure using a blob storage. Files, for example, team files are stored in SharePoint, chat files on the OneDrive for Business. A voicemail is specifically individual for a mailbox in Exchange. A recording is on a media service on Azure using a blob storage, smaller than 24 hours. An individual mailbox in Exchange is used for a calendar meeting. Exchange is used for contacts. And the telemetry data is hosted on a Microsoft data warehouse where there is no customer content in specific. To summarize all the different features in the focus of teamwork, we see that basically every team is different, so there is no one size fits to all approaches to collaboration. Microsoft 365 and Office 365 are designed specifically to meet the unique needs of every team, empowering people to communicate, collaborate and achieve more with purpose-built integrated applications. So when you decide which Microsoft 365 or Office 365 apps and services to use, think about specifically the work your organization does and the types of conversations your teams need to have. Basically, Teams, as we already know, is the hub for teamwork. So specifically where people, including people outside your organization, can actively connect and collaborate in real time to get things done. So to have a conversation right where the work specifically happens, it's really a great thing to work with this Teams approach, whether for co-authoring a document, having a meeting, or working together in other apps and services. So Teams is really the place to have informational chats, iterate quickly on a project work with team files and collaborate on shared delivery. Obviously there's also a lot of other stuff like the Outlook approach, where you can say, okay, I want to share this specific topic to Outlook. I want to share it to Teams. I want to have the capability that users can set the notification for missed activity emails to stay on top of missed conversations in Teams. So the missed activity mails show at least the last replies from the conversation. That's really a great option. And the most people are already a lot of familiar with Outlook. With SharePoint, this is used for sites, portal, intelligent content services, business process, and enterprise search. So obviously you can have Microsoft Teams and the users can add published SharePoint pages or lists as a tab in a Teams channel. And SharePoint pages let users share ideas using images, videos, links and documents, for example. SharePoint lists are a great way to collaborate on content and data. So the team members can view pages, add lists, and add comments in the Teams tab, for example. So you have a lot of great approaches that you can work with the SharePoint integration in that. Basically, on Jammer, the users are able to add the Jammer page to a channel in Teams or install, then pin the Jammer app, named Communities, for example, to the app bar. This allows team members follow and share conversations in Jammer without having to leave Teams. That's really a great option to work with. So the team members can participate in a Jammer conversation right from Teams or discuss a Jammer conversation in Teams before posting a reply to the wider Jammer group. That's a great way to connect people across the organization. For example, to use it for a new product announcement, for maybe some interesting thing for your customers, a new reference story or anything like that. It's a great option to work with. What's not written here on this part is also forms, because with users can, for example, access Microsoft Forms directly from Microsoft Teams. So you can easily set up a Forms tab and create a new form to collect, for example, responses, and add an existing form to collect responses or show survey results. And you can directly collaborate this with your team on a form basis. That's really a great option to work with. I've seen that very often also right now in different cases, courses, on the school environments. That's heavily used in specifically that. What's also not there is the planner and task option, because you get a rich set of a task management tool that helps you a lot to work specifically on your different projects. You can really gather the project movement, all the stuff that is inside of your organization. Also another point is the Microsoft Stream option, which adds an enterprise video service where people in your organization can, for example, upload, view and share videos securely. So you can collaborate using a video by adding a Microsoft Stream channel or video as a tab in Microsoft Teams. And users can also watch stream videos in Teams, such as the meeting recording or live events, what you do inside of your organization. Obviously, the whole Office apps that you can work with, it's a great opportunity, specifically OneNote, where you can share all your insights, your ideas and all the stuff to work on a paperless infrastructure. So, for example, you can create a OneNote tab to a channel in Teams to store text, images, handwritten notes and more, for example, for a great meeting experience. And you can add a OneNote tab to a channel in Teams for an existing notebook to, for example, centralize content. Also a great option is the bots and connectors and messaging extensions what you have. So you can, for example, chat with a bot to provide answers, updates, support topics, for example. You can get, for example, specific updates from other services like Trello, Jira, Twitter, RSS feeds, or in the development part about GitHub. And you have really a great capability with rich content in messages that the apps will find content from different services and send it straight to a message, for example. The easiest example is a weather or anything like that, weather report or anything like that, or a specific new report about your quarter finance statements or anything like that. That's A lot of powerful stuff what you can really gather in case of team working with Microsoft Teams. That's not all, obviously. Microsoft Teams gives administrators a lot of powerful tools to manage teams and connect users. Two general types of management tools are employed specifically. The first are the graphical user interfaces, and obviously the command line and automation tools, what you get with the whole set inside of Microsoft Teams. Be aware that you take advantage of a full administration capabilities by using the two tool sets. So you need to be assigned for a specific role that you can use the tools in the specific manner what you want to do. So you need to be assigned either to the global or the team service administrator role. We will talk about the different separate roles later on in this module or tomorrow. The primary graphical user interface tools for Teams management are the Microsoft Teams Admin Center, then the Azure Active Directory Admin Center, where you have all the identity specific topics on it, the Microsoft 365 Admin Center for a whole combination of all the services, and the Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance Center, where we have, for example, classification operations, DLP functionality, and all of that stuff. Obviously, we have around the whole command line support, which is done over PowerShell, and the several modules what we have for our experience on the PowerShell. And obviously the Grave API gives us a great opportunity for building up the lifecycle management. Okay, after the overview about the management tools, we dig a little bit deeper into the several tools what we have. We start with the Microsoft Teams Admin Center. With this, we obviously can work on all the different stuff what we need to establish on our Microsoft Teams infrastructure on our platform. As we already know, the team inside Microsoft Teams is based on a Microsoft 365 group. So, and this specific view, what we see for the group management and all the stuff, is not in the Microsoft Teams Admin Center. It's in the Azure Active Directory. So what we see here, we see really the focus on the team and the team specific settings itself. With the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, you can turn apps off or on for Teams in a tenant-wide settings, for example. And you must have the right appropriate administrative permissions, obviously, to access this portal. Under the apps, you can turn off or on default apps and configure settings, for example, controlling external apps. Default apps such as Planner, Braze, and Weather are provided by Teams. So to turn on an app, you can select the checkbox for that app, and to turn off an app, clear the checkbox. It's quite easy to do that. External apps are specifically provided by third parties, and you can configure some specific settings for external apps, for example, to allow external apps in Microsoft Teams, to allow side loading of external apps, and to enable new external apps by default, for example. You can also control organization-wide user settings in the Microsoft Teams Admin Center under the org-wide settings. There's just a few examples around that, what you can do with the specific portal. So let's summarize it short. You can have a great overview and management over your teams itself. Groups, the Microsoft 365 groups, are in the Azure Active Directory portal. You can see which devices are used, which locations you have inside your organization, specifically about calling and all of that stuff. You see the users and the assigned licenses, have the meeting policies, meeting settings, the messaging policy settings, and what we have discussed words is about a few settings about how you can handle your apps inside your Microsoft Teams strategy or your environment. Obviously there are some analytic tools and also the topics about the org-wide settings where you can define all the stuff there. We have just an overview about it. We will dig into that in the next following modules, that you are getting more experienced and have a great idea where you specifically manage which setting in the next module. So don't be afraid about that. That's really just the starting point, just the first impression about it. But to start with a few examples how you can manage it over the Teams admin portal, you just see the Teams overview grid where you see all the teams that are existing inside of your organization. So basically on that you can also directly jump into the management of a team. You can change the privacy, for example, you can add members and a lot of about this stuff. This is the approach from the administrative perspective. As you already heard or maybe know, obviously, is that just leaving the users alone will increase the number of different teams and you will end up in a great mess of teams built in your organization. So what we are talking later on about this is about the life cycle. So who is able to create, for example, teams? Who is the owner? What's happening when a team is sunsetting? And all around of these topics that we can work with. Here we see the administrative overview that you can work with and manage all over the Teams admin portal in that way. Obviously it gives you more powerful ways about Power Automate, working with the Grave API to bring your business process in a living condition inside of your organization, which we discuss later. Obviously you're also able to work on the Teams profile. As I already mentioned in the previous slide, so to add, remove members and owners, add or remove channels in that case, and define the different several group settings what you want to have inside of that. So this is also an addition to the first slide what I have shown you to manage a team from the perspective of an administrator in the Teams admin portal. Next we will come to a very powerful option to handle your Microsoft Teams infrastructure, obviously PowerShell. That's a great tool to work with, but I think if we come later on the next slide on Microsoft Grave API, you will really enhance your capabilities to work with. PowerShell is commonly used as a shell and scripting language that helps you as a system administrator to automate management tasks from a command line perspective. So you don't need to be a developer, you just can add it on a script basics and all of that stuff. So you can use as an administrator PowerShell to really manage settings, also to create obviously teams, to configure teams and to work with policies in teams. Basically you need to know that there are two PowerShell modules available. The first one is for Microsoft Teams, the PowerShell module, where you for example can create the specific settings, a new team, the members of a team, and the Skype for Business PowerShell module where you basically, for example, work with a calling plan or anything like that on your team site itself. So we have two PowerShell modules existing in a moment, the Microsoft Teams PowerShell module and the Skype for Business PowerShell module. So with this and the appropriate rights like global administrators or team service administrators, you can really interact with all the functionalities in Microsoft Teams of your organization. So let's discuss a little bit about the most powerful topic for automation and all the stuff to get information about all your Microsoft services. Is the Microsoft Grave API. So the Microsoft Grave is specifically the gateway to the data intelligence in Microsoft 365. So Grave provides a unified programmability model that you can use to access the tremendous amount of data in Microsoft 365, Windows 10 and the Enterprise Mobility Plus Security Suite. So the Grave is built on a REST-based API that allows you to access Teams and other Microsoft 365 services. In Grave, Teams is represented by a group resource, obviously, because we have on the basis a Microsoft 365 group. Most of the same group-based features apply also to Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365 groups. So the main difference being the way members communicate with each other, for example. Team members communicate by persistent chat in the context of a specific team. So the Microsoft 365 group members communicate by group conversations, which are email conversations that occur in the context of a group in Outlook. So in this case, Microsoft Grave is really a great and powerful tool for managing actual teams, creating teams, building up the life cycle of your teams, and obviously to interact with other services. Like, just imagine you want to bring up Azure Sentinel events inside of your Microsoft Teams infrastructure. If you need to interact with other services over the Microsoft Graph API, is really a great option to work with. We will see this in a demo in this module to give you a little bit of an idea what's happening or what's going on with this powerful management tool. Another important topic where we need to have really a closer look on is the Teams licensing. Basically, in terms of Teams core functionalities, there are no differences between the subscriptions that are available. The availability of the compliance capabilities does rely on the correct subscription level in this case. So Microsoft Teams licensing is designed to give you a maximum flexibility. So after using basic Teams features, you can buy add-on licenses for more features such as audio conferencing, phone system, calling plans, and Microsoft Teams rooms. For audio conferencing, your organization will need to buy and assign an audio conferencing license to each user who will set up dial-in meetings. So for calling plans, each user will need a phone system plus a domestic and an international calling plan, for example. To use messaging policies managed from the Teams Admin Center, you can control what chat and channel messaging features are available to users in Teams. You can use the default policy or create one or more custom messaging policies for people inside your organization. So all supported subscription plans are eligible for access to the Teams web client, desktop client, and the mobile clients. At the user level, access to Microsoft Teams can basically enabled or disabled on a per user basis by assigning or removing the Microsoft Teams product license based on the different organization requirements that we already have discussed for. So let's take a small look into the features and which requirements you have in case of licensing. So for example, if you want to use data loss prevention for Exchange Online and SharePoint, a minimum E3 license is required to do that. If you want to use information barriers, I know we didn't have talked to each that, is isolate different teams to each other to make it short. You need an E5 or a standalone license. If you want to use a phone system, you need to have an E5 or a specific add-on license. Let's go a little bit down to specific features about governance, for example, like the naming policy. If you want to use the naming policies to use a prefix suffix-based naming restrictions and to define a specific custom word blocking to build up your team's names, there is an Azure AD Premium P1 license required. This is basically part of E3. On the other hand, we will talk about classification, for example, the team classification. So if you want to assign classification functions to teams, you need to have an Azure AD Premium P1. That is also part of E3, as we already heard. Also about group creation, group usage guidelines, and these features, you need an Azure AD Premium P1 license. To use access reviews, for example, to have a great manageability of your guest users, you need to have the access reviews in place, and to perform reviews, you need to have an Azure AD Premium P2 license. That is basically part of the E5 licensing system. If you want to use terms of use, for example, in a conditional access scenario, you say, okay, I build my usage guidelines on it, the user needs to accept it. You need to have basically an Azure AD Premium P1 license that is also part of the E3. So basically security and compliance features from the Office 365 Advanced Compliance Standalone License Pack that are targeted for Exchange Online and SharePoint also affect the according Teams functionality. The Office 365 Advanced Compliance is also part of the Office 365 E5 plan. So all supported subscription plans are eligible for access to the Teams and web client, desktop clients and mobile apps, as I already mentioned before. Obviously you have several ways to manage the license assignments. So basically to manage Teams user licenses, you can use the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Teams user level licenses are managed directly through this Admin Center to this graphical interface. As an administrator, you can assign licenses to new users when new user accounts are created or to specific existing users. The role you need to have is the global administrator or the user management administrator privileges to manage Microsoft Teams licenses. So when a license SQ is assigned to a user, a Microsoft Teams license is automatically assigned and the user is enabled for Microsoft Teams. So you basically as an administrator can have a granular control over all the services and licenses, and the specific Microsoft Teams license for a specific user or a group of users that can be enabled or disabled over this portal. Obviously you can also use dynamic group memberships in Azure Active Directory. You can assign a specific attribute you want to collect and assign it. Or later on when we talk about the lifecycle management during this week, we see also the capability, for example, inside of the identity governance section in Azure Active Directory, where we can work in a specific scenario for license assignment.
In the next demonstration we go through the Microsoft Teams management. In this lab we will take a closer look to the management of Microsoft Teams during the different scenarios what we can do. First of all, we want to start with the Microsoft Teams Admin Center, where we can manage basically the Microsoft Teams. You see that on the Microsoft Teams Admin Center, Manage Teams, and then you can add directly a new team here in that case. Let's say that is our product X. We can define who is the team owner for that scenario. Let's say we want to add, for example, Dan Jump, the CEO of this organization. We can also provide a sensitivity label if it's activated for our scenario, and we can choose the privacy for the specific team here. So basically we start now creating the team, and afterwards we can add additional channels and additional members to the specific team during this graphical interface here. So it's just created. We see our product X here. We see the owners that we have defined. Here in this case we can add now the additional members. We directly see in the Teams client that product X is already enabled for us and pinned to the team of Dan Jump here. So this allows us obviously to create additional channels to define the specific settings of this Microsoft Teams. That's one part how we can create basically Microsoft Teams from the Teams Admin Center. The next part what we can do is we can use PowerShell for this specific reason, and the Microsoft Teams PowerShell CMD-lets. So we can see, for example, at first which teams are already existing on this tenant. You see the new created product X from right now. And we can create as well here on this part a new team over PowerShell. I have prepared this stuff that we can discuss it here. We just define a few variables: the team name, the description, the visibility, and the team owner. That's the first stuff what we're gonna do here over PowerShell. Then I already connected to the Microsoft Teams part here over this CMD-let. Then we can define the whole group, because this is the underlying part what we need to work with. So now we have the access type. The access type we don't need specifically here. Can do it right now over the default value. So it's done for us. We can say we want to add team user to the group ID. And then we can also provide here additional channels, for example. So for example, a sales channel marketing, releases, and production. So that's basically done for us. If we take a look to the client itself, we see that here the video project is already done for us, and the 4 channels are generated inside of the Microsoft Teams client itself. Marketing, production, releases, and sales for this case. So let's see the team here, that we can get the ID. So we see that here the video project for this MS700. Just copy the group ID. Then we can put it here inside of this commandlet. And this both commands allows us to add a Teams user or to add a Teams channel user. That are the both scenarios that we can run here to say, okay, we want to have this user as a team user and another one to a team channel user for the specific production channel. That's not recognized already. That was example that was existing in the past. This is why I wanted to show this during this demonstration. So basically what we can see right now inside of the team, when we go there to check the team, to manage it, we see the different members and the Android MAU that we already added to the team during this scenario. So that's the way over PowerShell what we can do. We can also do that over a Grave connection, so that we can say, okay, we want to do the following. We want to create first of all M365 group. That's the basic scenario what we're gonna do. Let's say, okay, we want to create this. How we want to call it? It's the body, the JSON body, what we need to use. I want to call it video series with a mail nickname, mail enabled, and this user then jump as the owner. That's another way to go over Grave. So we can just post it here to do that and run the query. So basically what we don't find here is the resource owner. That's then jump at liano.ch. That's what I wanted to show you, that it directly reacts to your scenario. The tenant what we're gonna use here is emslabs.ch. So we have also a clear failure topic inside of this part. So we can just change it to the right one. So run the query. So we defined the Office 365 group in the backend. We just need to copy the ID of the group to activate the Microsoft Teams feature set on it. And we can do it here specifically that we copy the group ID inside of this command. We need to use a put for this scenario to do that. So just change it and to do some settings on the Microsoft Teams itself. We just need to do that in the body again, and we say put, run the query, and the team should be created in the background. You see that directly on the Teams client, that we have the video series that's enabled for us, and we see specifically that then Jump is the owner of this Microsoft Teams. So what we have seen during this demonstration, we have seen that we can use, for example, the Teams Admin Center to create a Microsoft team, manage it. We can also do that over PowerShell, and on the other hand, we can use it over the Grave API, which I have showed you with the Grave Explorer, that you can handle all these stuffs during these scenarios.
After working through the Microsoft Teams overview and the management tools and capabilities, we will go ahead with the management of Teams security and compliance in the next section. Now in this section we will talk about the Teams security and compliance, and you see already that there are a lot of different objectives inside of this section. So Obviously, this is the overview because on day 2 we have a specific module that's really completely focusing on security and compliance. Where we need to start is always the identity and access management. So we need to see how we secure our identities based on an on-premise Active Directory that are synchronized to the cloud, cloud-only accounts, how we handle guest accounts, and all of these topics, including group management, because the Microsoft 365 group is a base element in the Microsoft Teams infrastructure. On the other hand, obviously, how we can control access to our application with conditional access, for example. So let's assume that you want to protect specifically the web access to your Microsoft Teams infrastructure. You could use conditional access to provide or to require, better saying, a multi-factor authentication, for example, or to block a download, for example, on an unsecure device. That's the typical stuff what we kind of work through. There, Azure Active Directory and also Cloud App Security is a good helper to improve exactly this identity and access management task. On the second stage, on the third, we will put them together. So we need basically to discover where is our sensitive data at rest and in specific in motion. So with the Azure Information Protection story, with Cloud App Security, with Defender ADP, we get a lot of great capabilities to protect our sensitive information when it travels, when it's in transit. Also, obviously, we respond to maybe specific chats that are not in the correct channel, so that we also give our users the capability to learn from our features what we include inside of our security and compliance strategy, that they learn, that they know the behavior, and that they are really sure that they don't make any mistake to provide, for example, a data leakage or any other case of that. Then the data governance about archiving the information, the hold information, that we don't delete the important information on our system. That obviously is the whole stuff on that. Also, the complete risk management on it. So we can, for example, enforce typically communication compliance policies. We can detect malicious content and all around that. So this builds up a real big field where we work through, and this is why we have exactly for that a second module that we can go a little bit deeper inside. So I will give you just a few overview topics that we have a short warm-up on these topics, and then we can go ahead on that. Basically, if we are talking about securing our services, in specific here Microsoft Teams, it comes very quickly in the game that we talk about strong authentication. As Microsoft with the Azure Active Directory platform provides a lot of capabilities to work through, we just really need to discuss this. So, because MFA, multi-factor authentication, prevents basically 99% of identity attacks. So it helps us to provide identity because all the associated data is based on your identity, on your employees. So we have the capability of the Microsoft Authenticator, typical multi-factor authentication scenario that you get a push message or a token you need to enter, that we have proven that you have a second device and that you are really the person you are. On the other hand, with biometric scenarios, we can work with Windows Hello. We can also work with hard tokens that are based on OTP and an OAuth standard based. And it's really great options what we can do here to secure our basic identity, that it's not built on the password itself, because password guessing, spray attacks are very popular, and this really protects you in a good manner to work with a strong authentication scenario. So after talking about the strong authentication mechanisms that are available over Azure Active Directory, we are directly leaded to conditional access. Specifically, conditional access is the main tool set where you provide the right access to the right persons in an authentication topic. It gathers a lot of signals about your user location, your application you use, the real-time risk of you, and obviously about the device information. conditional access is mainly the technical implementation of the zero trust model where you can work with. Organizations like yours are really in a constant changing security threat environment. So employees often need to access the company resources as well as communication channels from different locations. So your organization, maybe you know that, face a challenge with protecting the company data and at the same time providing the employees with access to workplace resources they need. So Microsoft Teams users are accessing corporate data not only from their PC or laptop, but also using their mobile devices or any other kind of information. So conditional access policy apply, for example, actions to users who sign in to apps from their devices depending on multiple conditions. So conditions might include a user, group membership, an IP location information, a specific device type, an application, a real-time risk detection, or, for example, the integration of Microsoft Cloud App Security information. So you can choose to have Microsoft Teams as a cloud application that will be managed by conditional access policies. Conditional access policies are set for these cloud apps apply Microsoft Teams when a user directly sign in to Microsoft Teams on any client. Microsoft Teams is supported separately as a cloud app in Azure Active Directory, conditional access policy, and they are set for the Microsoft Teams cloud app only or for other applications to apply to the specific service and to the sign-ins for that. So that's a great way really to work with conditional access. To go over that, the conditional access policies are managed over the Azure Active Directory portal itself. So you don't have any chance to provide the conditional access policies over the Microsoft Teams admin center. That is really done in Azure AD.
In the next demonstration we will discuss the conditional access options to secure our Microsoft Teams environment. In this demonstration we take a look at the conditional access functionality, what we can do. I already have here conditional access policy enabled for Megan Bowen, that's a user inside of my tenant, and I want to require, for example, multi-factor authentication and to monitor the session with a specific feature set. What you see is here that I added some specific cloud applications like Microsoft Teams, SharePoint Online, the Outlook groups, to have all the dependency of Microsoft Teams for my use case inside of the place. Then I have the Salesforce application and the Kerberos demo application. I just focused on the specific user, on Megan Bowen, that I can test specifically that scenario. Megan Bowen in this scenario is also a guest user from another tenant that I have also included a guest scenario over this specific scenario here. So what we can do as well during conditional access, obviously we can use the different applications what I have shown. We can also go through different user actions, and we can build up some of conditions what we want to use to apply this conditional access policy itself. For example, we can include the user risk, is it high, medium or low. We can use the sign-in risk, that can be high, medium, low or no risk. That's about a premium P2 feature what we can use from the identity protection to include this scenario. We can also say which device platforms you want to catch inside of this condition part, and specific locations, like for example any location, all trusted locations and selected locations. For example here an home office what I have integrated with a specific IP address, what we can do as a condition here inside of this scenario. Then we can go through the different client applications what we want to catch, for example browser, mobile apps, desktop clients, the Exchange ActiveSync clients or other clients, the dependency what we want to include inside our scenario. Also the device state would be a good scenario to exclude, for example, hybrid Azure AD joint devices or devices marked as compliant for this specific reason. So that are basically the conditions what we can use, and also the different access controls. For example, the granting of the access with multi-factor authentication, a device to be marked as compliant, that is mobile device managed, for example, with Microsoft Intune, an hybrid Azure AD joint device that could be a normal client. You'll see that, for example, here on this specific client. You can check that, dsrec cmd.exe and status. That could be a client like this, that is Azure AD joint and domain joint, so we have it in both scenarios. This would apply specifically to this granting of the access. And we can define a specific approved client application that is needed, an app protection policy that is need to be applied, and a require password change, or a terms of use that we can also use to say, hey, we want to grant you the access just if you apply to these terms of use what we present you. And last but not least, I already have integrated here a conditional access app control, which means that I integrate cloud app security to monitor the session and to add additional functionality on the specific user set. So that is just a small example of a conditional access policy, which we can do here in this case, for example, to protect Microsoft Teams itself.
Microsoft Teams is basically built on the Microsoft 365 and Office 365 hyperscale enterprise-grade cloud, and it's delivering the advanced security and compliance capabilities for you as a customer or organization or the administrator. Basically, Teams enforces team-wide and organization-wide two-factor authentication, single sign-on through the Active Directory, and the encryption of data in transit at rest. So, in deep, files are stored in SharePoint and are backed by SharePoint encryption, for example. Notes are stored in OneNote and are backed by the OneNote encryption mechanism in the background. The OneNote data is stored in the team SharePoint site. The Wiki tab can also be used for note-taking, and its content is also stored within the team SharePoint site. Additional functionality like the advanced threat protection provides some feature sets for Microsoft Teams along all the different capabilities of SharePoint and OneDrive, and allows you to determine if content in this application is malicious in nature and block this content from user access. On the other hand, we have the safe links that's specifically not available during this time for Microsoft Teams. There's a public preview and specifically over the tab program. And while a release date for general availability isn't set, so later on you get more information on the websites of Microsoft to see it's available or not. Then the safe attachments, that's a specific feature that is designed to enhance user security by checking for detecting malicious attachments.
The conditional access policy, I think I already have discussed this before, is really a good way to work with to enrich your security inside of this topic. And obviously Microsoft Teams desktop clients for Windows and Mac support the modern authentication, so you will have it over all the platforms, and that's a really great opportunity because modern authentication brings a sign-in based on the Azure Active Directory authentication library to Microsoft 365 or to the Office client itself, and this around all the platforms what are in the game in the moment. On the other hand, obviously Microsoft Teams desktop application support also the app locker feature that allows you really to have on the Windows 10 security side a real great experience to work. Now let's talk a little bit about compliance. Teams has a wide range of information to help you with compliance areas, with different compliance areas, including, for example, communication compliance for channels, chats, attachments, retention policy, data loss prevention, e-discovery and legal holds for channels, chats and files, audit log search, as well as the mobile application management with Microsoft Intune. With this short overview, we get through the 5 basic features or main features inside of this field as well. An information barrier. Now, information barrier are specifically policies that you as a Teams administrator, you can work to really can provide a communication between different people, or you block that. On the other hand, you have the communication compliance that allows you to add users to an in-scope policy that you can, for example, be configured to examine Microsoft Teams communications for offensive language, sensitive information, and information related to internal regulatory standards. That's a great way to work through the whole sections in Microsoft Teams to really see for the sensitive information and act with the Microsoft 365 security and compliance framework onto it. The retention policy obviously feature for regulatory, legals, or the business reasons itself or own policies you have to really have the right retention inside of your infrastructure. The DLP policies allow you really to block or to handle specifically sensitive data that your IP isn't going over a leakage to the wrong people. The e-discovery feature is really a great way that you have for investigation on-site of your information, what you have into the different Microsoft 365 services. So you see, this is just a few samples here that we have to work exactly on your compliance side, on your organization. And with this feature set, really you get rich part of it to go through. So if we go a little bit deeper about DLP, data loss prevention in Teams, obviously we monitor the content, we detect specifically policy violations, and we remediate. As an organization today, you are mainly concerned with protecting your sensitive information and being compliant with internal business standards and industry regulations. So if we talk about sensitive data, we mean, I think, the information which can include financial data, personally identifiable information such as credit card numbers, social security numbers, health records, and so on. With the data loss prevention policies, you as your administrator can protect your organization by identifying, monitor, and automatically protect sensitive information across your Office 365 environment. DLP policies basically can help you to identify sensitive information that are used across many locations like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Microsoft Teams. You can, for example, prevent the sharing of sensitive information by accident. You can monitor or protect sensitive information in the desktop versions of Excel, PowerPoint, and Word. And obviously you can view DLP reports with content that matches, for example, your organization DLP policies. If you have a license for the DLP functionality, the policies obviously can be configured to prevent people from sharing sensitive information in a Microsoft Teams channel or a chat session. With the policies, you as an admin can protect sensitive information in messages and sensitive information in documents, for example. A very important topic is that you educate your Teams users about the data loss prevention policies. So when you, for example, you created and applied the DLP policy, and there is an action taken in the Microsoft Teams section which conflicts with that policy, the user will get a policy tip that you work with and interact with your user itself. For example, if you detect a social security number, then a policy tip can apply to say, okay, hey, look, this message is, for example, blocked because a social security number is inside of the game. In the case the user tried, for example, to send a social security number in a Microsoft Teams channel and the message was blocked, and obviously there is a help link inside of that. So to really educate the users to say, hey, what can I do? So in this link will open, for example, a dialog box which provides additional information about to resolve the issue. As an administrator, obviously you can choose to allow users to override the DLP policy in your organization. So when you configure a DLP policy, you can use the default policy tips, for example, or customize policy tips for your organization. So in my example, what I have brought is that you can say, for example, your message was blocked because it contains sensitive data. Let's assume that you write a text, your social security numbers, or classification of diseases, whatever. And here's what you can do. For example, you can override, but type a justification why you want to do that. Or report this my admin, it doesn't contain sensitive data. That's also a helpful information you need as an administrator to say, hey, is my rule correctly applied? Is it configured properly? And if there is a lot of overriding and sanding, you need to think about your policy settings. So you really gather a lot of great material for providing a rich, cool and used feature set of the user itself, and you improve your security as well by educate your users inside of your infrastructure. The next feature set is e-discovery. For example, protecting content from accidental or intended deletion is only effective when there are ways to retrieve them without violating legal and regulatory restrictions. So e-discovery feature is for placing a hold on content locations relevant to a legal case and using the content search tool to search the locations on hold for content that might be responsive to your case. You can use e-discovery in Office 365 to search for content in Exchange online mailboxes, Microsoft 365 groups, Microsoft Teams, SharePoint Online and OneDrive for business sites, and Skype for business conversations. All one-to-one or group chats are journaled through the respective user's mailbox, and all channel messages are journaled through to the group mailbox representing the team. To facilitate the e-discovery for guest-to-guest chats, a cloud-based mailbox, or let's call it a phantom mailbox, is required to store the one-to-N data and being indexed for e-discovery and compliance content search. Files uploaded are covered under the e-discovery functionality in SharePoint Online and in OneDrive for Business. Another important topic inside of Microsoft Teams is the data governance and retention. So really, you need to comply proactively with industry regulations and internal policies. You need to reduce your risk in the event of litigation or a security. And obviously, you need to help your organization to share knowledge effectively and be more agile. So it's always a big deal between all the different things between usability and security and all the compliance topics against regulations and internal policy. For most organizations, the volume and complexity of data increases really daily, from an email to documents to instant messages and many more things. So effectively managing or governing this information is important because you must exactly comply proactively with the industry regulations, and specifically you need to retain content for a minimum period of time. For example, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act might require you to retain certain types of content for 7 years. In case of reducing your risk in the event of litigation or security breach, by permanently deleting old content that you are no longer required to keep, for example, and to help your organization to share knowledge effectively and be more agile, but by ensuring that your users work only with the content that is current and relevant to them. A retention policy can help you in your organization either to retain data for compliance, namely preservation policy, for a specific period, or remove data, namely via deletion policy, if it's considered liability after a specific period, for example. Retention policies are available in the Security and Compliance Center, and they work across the different workloads and data types, such as Exchange Mail, SharePoint document libraries, and OneDrive files. The Teams conversations are persistent and retained by default. So with the introduction of retention policies, you as an administrator can configure retention policies, both preservation and deletion, in the Security and Compliance Center for Microsoft Teams chat and channel managers. So in the following slide, we see how, for example, a retention policy is applied inside of Microsoft Teams. As we already know, team conversations are persistent and kept as long as the team exists. However, you can configure retention policies for both, as we already heard also, for preservation and deletion of data. So a retention policy for Teams chat and channel messages are set basically in the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, what we see there in this slide. A retention policy helps you to retain data for compliance or delete data after a specific period. So the team's retention policies do support preservation, so that keeps the team's data for a specific duration and then delete. Or on the other hand, the delete team's data after a specific duration. For Teams private chats, one-on-one and one-to-many chats, and Teams channel messages, you can set up with separate retention policies. So to set up these policies, you need to log into your Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, go to the Solutions, select Information Governance, and you can turn on Teams channel messages and team chats. This is what we see here in this specific slide that you have an overview about this. So this gives you really a great opportunity to work and exactly on this topic. Let's take a look on how retention works for Microsoft Teams. So you can use your retention policies to retain chats and channel messages, what we already have seen. So Teams chats are stored in a hidden folder in the mailbox of each user included in the chat, and Teams channel messages are stored in a similar hidden folder in the group mailbox for the team. So it's basically very important to understand that Teams uses an Azure-powered chat service that allows stored data, and by default this service stores the Teams data. So this retention policy can, for example, permanently delete data from both the Exchange mailboxes and the underlying Azure-powered chat service. Teams chats and channel messages are not affected by retention policies that are configured for user or group mailboxes. Even through Teams chats and channel messages are stored in Exchange, this Teams data is included only by a retention policy that is configured for the Teams channel messages and Teams chats locations. That's an important concept you really need to understand. If we talk about sensitivity labels for Microsoft Teams, we need to see our modern workplace, because most organizations use email, chat services, collaboration tools, storage platforms to share information and documentation inside and outside the organization. So this makes the data no longer located behind a perimeter firewall. It flows everywhere across devices, apps and services. This open collaboration approach adds additional challenges to protect the sensitive business data in files and to follow the various legal and regulatory requirements that force companies to retain data for certain lengths of time or delete it after it's not required for any business use case. Microsoft 365 addresses these challenges with sensitivity and retention labels and a unified labeling strategy. So a sensitivity label can basically help the user to classify documents and protect the sensitive content in files. The sensitivity label enables data classification across the company and enforce protection based on that classification, which helps users to take the right actions on the right content and prevent unwanted leaking of information outside the organization. So sensitive or sensitivity labels are basically based on the rights management service available in Azure RMS and the on-premise AD RMS. So sensitivity labels are used to classify and protect documents with encryption and central management capabilities, to specifically monitor access and even revoke access to documents even when they have left their own organization and the perimeter of administrative access. Sensitivity labels can be applied manually by the end user or automatically based on search patterns while they are processed by the services such as mail flow rules in Exchange Online and in workflows, for example. So in short, sensitivity labels protect the content of a document even if the storage on which the data is saved is open for collaboration, even the external participants. So this gives you really a great option to work with. So you just create and publish labels, and then you're also able to modify and delete published labels, and you also can work through the managed team creation arrows that works in a specific topic when you work with the sensitivity labels. You can create that labels in the Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance Center, where you have all the capabilities to work with. But keep in mind, not every label automatically protects, and this is also a condition we want to use, because not every material needs really to be encrypted. Really think about it. Also, if you talk about a project inside of your organization, always start with classifying, labeling, get your experience, and later on really start to encrypt your content. In the following slide you see how we can use sensitivity labels in teams. For example, you create a label named confidential in the Security and Compliance Center, and you configure teams so that any team that's created with this label must be a private team, for example. So when a user creates a new team and selects the confidential label, the only privacy option that's available to the user is private. Or other privacy options such as public and org-wide are disabled for the user. This is just the starting. Obviously, now if you classify any information, for example as confidential, and you want to upload it to a public team, you have now the options to block and allow exactly these topics. In the moment it's not available that it automatically encrypts or changes the specific label. So this is a coming up feature set what Microsoft thinks about in the moment. Let's see two examples. For example, protecting sensitive information in messages, and on the other hand, the protecting sensitive information in documents. So you have typically the classification options in both scenarios available. So for example, if we go to the messages, we have attempts to share sensitive information in a Teams chat or channel with guests, with external users. So in this case you have enabled a DLP policy that, for example, this defines to prevent this. So messages with sensitivity information that are sent to external users are directly deleted. That's a great functionality to do that. And it's within seconds, it's real time. So that's really a great topic to work with. Or if we talk about the protection of sensitive information in documents, just imagine that we have an access from a guest to sensitive documents. If it's classified in a correct manner and protected by Azure RMS, the user is not allowed, for example, to access this information if he is not implicit equipped with the right permissions. That's the right stuff here. In this case, you also can say, okay, by this DLP policy, you need to have specifically SharePoint and OneDrive in the protection scenario, because this is the backend system Microsoft Teams uses for that, and to say, okay, is it allowed or disallowed to do that for the specific user. That's a great way to work with a DLP functionality in that. It's highly recommended really that you work with policy tips, that you educate your users, as I already mentioned. This is the screenshot about the example I have described before. So data loss prevention capabilities were recently added to Microsoft Teams chat and channel messages. But keep in mind you need to have an Office 365 Advanced Compliance license, which is available as a standalone option and is included in Office 365 E5 and Microsoft 365 E5 Compliance. So Office 365 and Microsoft 365 E3 includes DLP protection for SharePoint Online, OneDrive and Exchange Online. This also includes files that are shared through Teams, because Teams uses SharePoint Online and OneDrive to share files. That's an important topic also about the DLP functionality that you can use in the different license scenario. And really is a great way, really work with these policy tips, because this also shows the user the valid things here, what's happening and what he is protected for. And this helps you, like the belt in your car, what you always use, that the users accept your security solution. And this is one of the most important stuff you need to think about if you implement data leakage prevention. In the following slide you see how you can work with that in your portal. So you can choose different policies. You can integrate, for example, as it's shown here, to search for US financial data or for different other patterns. There are some around 100 different definitions already inside, or you can put your own information, your own rule set inside of these topics. So this brings you really a great way to work with. It's based on protectionoffice.com, and you can sign in and you go just to data loss prevention policy and you select the policy you want to see, and which locations you want to include. So that's the best way really to see how easy it is to work with the LP policy in Microsoft Teams. I think we don't need to discuss that with Microsoft 365 we provide a powerful communication and collaboration tool for the end user. So however, suppose that you want to restrict communications between certain people inside your organization to safeguard internal information. You can fulfill these requirements by implementing information barriers that restrict communication between users inside a tenant. Information barriers in Teams are used to prevent individuals or groups from communicating with each other. They also prevent lookups and discovery. This means that if restricted users attempt to communicate with each other, they will not find that other user in the people picker, for example.
Now let's take a closer look on the communication compliance in Microsoft 365. The communication compliance is basically an insider risk solution in Microsoft 365 that helps to minimize communication risks by helping you detect, capturing and acting on inappropriate messages in your organization. So we have predefined and custom policies that allow us to scan internal and external communications for the specific policy matches, so they can be examined by designed or designated reviewers. Reviewers can, for example, investigate in scanned emails in Microsoft Teams, Jammer or third-party communications in your organization and take the appropriate actions to make sure they're compliant with your organization's message standards. So basically we have the following things that we get in place. We can scan increasing types of communication channels, the increasing volume of message data, and the regulatory enforcement and the risk of fines specifically. We have the different scenarios for the communication compliance itself. The corporate policies, where for example users must comply with acceptable use, ethical standards and other corporate policies in all their business related communications. And the communication compliance policies can also detect policy matches and help you to take the corrective actions to help to mitigate these types of incidents. For example, you could scan user communications in your organization for potential human resources concerns such as harassment or let's say the use of inappropriate or offensive language. The second one is the risk management. Organizations basically are responsible to all the communications distributed throughout their infrastructure and corporate network systems. So using the communication compliance policies to help identify and manage potential legal exposure and risk can help to minimize the risk before they can damage corporate operations. Let's assume the example that you could, for example, scan messages in your organization for unauthorized communications about specifically confidential projects such as an upcoming acquisition, merger, earnings disclosures, reorganizations, or for example a leadership team change that can happen. The third point is the regulatory compliance. So basically most organizations must comply with some type of regulatory compliance standards as part of their normal operating procedures. These regulations often require organizations to implement some type of supervisory or oversight process for specifically messaging that is appropriate for their specific industry. The Financial Industry Regulation Authority, FINRA, for example, the Rule 3110, is a good example of a requirement for an organization to have a supervisory procedure in place to scan user communications and the types of businesses in which they engage specifically. Also another example could be a need to review broker-dealer communications in your organization. For example, to safeguard against potential money laundering, insider trading, collusion or bribery activities, for example. So communication policies can help you really to for your organization to meet these specific requirements by providing a process to both scan and report on corporate communications. So that's basically the stuff what you can do with the communication policies in that place. Okay, let's discuss a little bit about the communication compliance challenge in chats. Basically, the communication compliance and Microsoft Teams are really tightly integrated and can help you really to minimize communication risk in your organization. So basically, after you configured your first communication compliance policy, you can actively manage inappropriate Microsoft Teams messages and content that is automatically flagged in alerts, for example. Communication compliance in Microsoft Teams begins with the planning and creation of predefined or custom policies to identify the inappropriate user activities in Teams channels or in one-to-ones and groups. But keep in mind that you'll need to configure some permissions and basic prerequisites as a part of the configuration process, obviously. The Teams administrators can configure communication policies at the following levels, as you see in the slide. On a user level, which means that policies at this level apply to an individual Teams user or maybe apply to all team users in your organization. And these specific policies cover messages that these users may send in a one-to-one or group chats, for example. Chat communications for the users are automatically monitored across all the Microsoft Teams where the users are a member of. The Teams level is that policies at this level really apply to the Microsoft Team channel. These policies cover, for example, the messages sent in Teams channel only. Basically, after you have configured your policies and have received communication compliance alerts for Microsoft Teams messages, it's time for a compliance reviewer in your organization to take the action on these messages. The reviewer itself can help safeguard your organization by reviewing communication compliance alerts and removing flagged messages from view in a Microsoft team, for example.
Now that you have talked about the different compliance policies, we just go short in the audit log section that you can have a look on it. You can do, for example, activity searches on the audit log itself. You see here in this example what you can do about start date, end date, specific user searches, some files and folders, sites, and all the information. You can really gather a real rich set of information about the audit log search. That brings you a lot of valid information inside of your organization and how to work with the different security features. On the following slide we can see the information protection architecture, which provides us a lot of great tools with the Office 365 information protection tools in the backend. So we see that from the Microsoft Teams perspective, if we work with files and information on that, we see the SharePoint files integration, the OneNote and the OneDrive for Business integration that can be directly cached over the Office 365 information protection tools. And the chat service and the email part is another point in the backend side where we can also gather all the information. So with all these infos, you can really have a great ingestion flow of Teams data to both the Exchange and the SharePoint backend itself for files and messages with the tools what we have already have a short overview about it, about e-discovery, legal hold, compliance, content search, archiving, retention, and audit logs. Also another great information source are the usage reports, where you can find under analytics and reports, under usage reports. There you can exactly see how the teams are used and what are working there, about messaging, active channels, how many guest accounts are there, how many active users. So you really can gather the information maybe also for your design of teams, that it is really necessary to have an additional team or to reduce the amount of teams itself. So you can also see the reports directly, you can filter on it, and on the other hand, obviously you can download it for a specific date range, what you can specify. Just to give you a small help to interpret the report, so we have the privacy fields, where it refers to whether the team is a private team or a public team. Obviously, the active users is the number of active users in the team in specified team period. The guests is the number of guests in the team. Active channels, obviously, I think that's clear. The post messages and reply messages are also there in this place. And you see also the urgent messages that runs over this specific team or channel itself. And you see the reactions and the mentions there, that you have really great usage reports inside of that topic. Also, you have the channel messages, that is specifically the number of unique messages that the team users posted in a Teams chat during the specified time period. The Microsoft Teams User Activity Report gives you a few of the most common activities that your users perform in Teams. This includes how many people engage in a chat, in a channel, how many communicate via private chat message, and how many participate in calls or meetings. So you can see this information for your whole organization as well as for each individual user. That's really also a good reporting stuff that you need for planning, designing, and working through your Microsoft Teams experience. In the next short demonstration, I will give you a short overview about the security and compliance features in Microsoft Teams. Okay, let's see one of the security and compliance features, the classification topic. We see here the sensitivity labels are already prepared here in my environment with all the standard classification schemas here of Microsoft, and I provide also a policy to apply exactly these different labels to the users in my organization. So if I go here, you'll see all the settings that are included in this specific part. If I open now, for example, a Word document, and I start writing sensible information, like my sensible text right now, and say, okay, I want to have this as confidential for all employees. And we see here also the watermarking of the confidential part, including the Azure Rights Management for this document that is only readable for users inside of this organization of this Azure Active Directory tenant. The same functionality but not with protection features are already included in Microsoft Teams. I enabled that by the directory settings, that I enabled the Microsoft Information Protection labels. And if I go right now to Microsoft Teams, just go through, let's say, the getting started one, the team. I say I edit the team. I see here the sensitivity label is exactly here in this part, and I can say, okay, for example, that's just a confidential information inside there, and I can allow and block uploading different classifications, and also I can do the following. I can put the policy in place. For example, if I use the sensitivity confidential, it needs to be automatically a private privacy. That's one of the basic features. What we can see here, we will really deep dive tomorrow in the module security and compliance in it. It's just to get an idea what capabilities are available and what is inside of the box. After walking through the security and compliance overview section, we will now hand over to the Managing Microsoft Teams overview. To administer Teams in the Microsoft Teams portal, we need to assign before in Azure Active Directory the appropriate roles. We can do that also with a privileged identity management approach that let's say we need to request the role when we need to configure something in Microsoft Teams. That's really a great way that we don't use the rights permanent on our user account. That's a great opportunity to work with. Let's talk a little bit about the best practices for organization-wide teams. So to get the most benefit of your org-wide team owners should follow the following best practices. So allow only team owners to post to the general channel to reduce the channel noise itself. Turn off add team and add team name mentions to prevent overloading the entire organization. automatically mark important channels as favorites to ensure that everyone in your organization engages in specific conversations. Set up channel moderation so that the moderators can control who can start a new post in a channel, and add and remove moderators to control whether team members can reply to existing channel messages, and control whether bots and connectors can submit channel messages. Remove accounts that might not belong to it, and make sure that you use Teams to remove users from your org-wide team. If you remove a user some other way, such as Microsoft 365 Admin Center or from a group in Outlook, the user might not be added back to the org-wide team. Basically, a team owner is the person who creates the team. Team owners can make any member of their team a co-owner when they invite them to the team, or at any point after they've joined the team. Having multiple team owners lets you share the responsibilities of managing settings and memberships, obviously, including invitations. So team members are the people who the owners invite to join the team. So we see on the table the different capabilities we have. Obviously, to create a team a member is not able to do. Leave a team a member itself obviously can do that. Edit team name, delete team are just for the owner, and add members is also just allowed for the owners itself. Let's just give you a short idea about these two roles we have in Microsoft Teams. From the administrative perspective, we have 4 specific roles, administrative roles: the Teams Service Administrator, the Teams Communication Administrator, the Teams Communication Specialist, and the Teams Communication Support Engineer. So basically the difference between the communication specialist and the engineer is that the engineer have more capabilities in form of troubleshooting tools and such a thing. The Teams Communication Administrator is just about the calling and meetings features, and the Teams Service Administrator is overall the administrator of all. So other roles like the moderators is also available. So both team owners and members can have moderator capabilities for a channel. So if moderation is turned on for a team, obviously, moderators can start new posts in a channel and control whether team members can reply to existing channel messages. So they can also control whether bots and connections can submit channel messages. That's really a great way, and the moderator capabilities are assigned at the channel level. A high important topic where we also discuss later in this series about it is the management of guest access. We have the 3 levels: the Azure Active Directory, the Microsoft Teams Administrator Center, and the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. You can manage Teams guest features and capabilities through 4 different levels of authorization: the Azure AD, Microsoft Teams, 365 Groups, and the SharePoint Online on OneDrive for Business. So all the authorization levels apply to your Microsoft 365 tenant. Administrators, as you, can manage guest access by using the Microsoft Teams Admin Center, Azure AD, and Microsoft 365 Admin Center, as I already mentioned. So the different authorization levels provided by these tools give you the flexibility in how you set up guest access for an organization. For example, if you don't want to allow guest users in Teams but want to allow it overall in your organization, just turn off guest access in Teams. The Azure Active Directory, as the heart, the identity management system for all the Microsoft services, allows you as an administrator to determine whether the external collaborators can be invited into your tenant as guests, and in what way specifically. In Azure AD, the settings for invitations apply at the tenant level basic, and control the guest experience at the directory, tenant, and application level. So you as an administrator can configure settings to limit guest user permissions and grant members and guests the ability to invite additional guests, for example. In the Teams Admin Center, you can use the Teams Admin Center to add guests at the tenant level and manage also the guest user policy and permissions, including pulling reports, guest user activity, and all the other stuff. So it's a quite important part to really have a complete life cycle over the guest access, because maybe it's just turned on for Teams or for the overall tenant. What's happening if this project is finished and he leaves the team? What about the Teams account, the guest account in that? how you manage that, what's happening when the guest user leaves the origin organization. That's all the stuff what you really need to be aware about, and we will take a really closer look on that. The following figure gives you the idea how you see the whole guest authentication. So from Azure Active Directory perspective, is it really enabled or disabled on the Office 365 group settings, on the external group settings? What about the guest authentication and the three subsystems, SharePoint Online, Office 365 groups, and Microsoft Teams apps, and so on. So this is really most important thing, that you really control your guest access and don't provide any hole in your security that you have a data leakage in this moment. See about Module 2, we will have really close discussion about that. A main difference between the guest user and your external access that we see here is the guest access is more about authenticating against the Azure Active Directory, against the service, and what you can do inside of the tenant itself. The external access, the federation, with this you can see how you communicate over Skype for Business and Teams users with other organizations, for example. So the external access you need to consider when you have users in different domains in your business. You want the people in your organization to use Teams to contact people in specific businesses outside of your organization. And you want any Teams user worldwide to find and contact you just using your email address. Just think about scenario 1. You can use Open Federation. This is the default setting and lets people in your organization find, call, send IM chats and set up meetings with people external to your organization. Scenario 2, obviously you have on a low list, and the option 3, you have a block list. So there's a great opportunity to block several domains or allow several domains. Another great tool is a dynamic membership topic, so that you automatically add or remove the users based on an attribute of the user to the correct team. So with dynamic membership, you have exactly this option, and this gives you a great capability in that. So for this, but is a requirement that you have an Azure AD Premium P1 license, because this defines the functionality of dynamic group memberships. So the team membership is then assigned by a tenant administrator to any user's Azure AD properties. I will show you this very soon in a short demo.
In the next demonstration we'll discuss the Microsoft Teams guest access and the dynamic group memberships.
Okay, now let's take a look into the guest access and into the dynamic group membership. First of all, we want to start with the guest access. I obviously need to allow that in my Azure Active Directory tenant. I have it here established like guest user permissions are limited, admin and users in guest invite role can invite, also members can invite someone. I also say, okay, I enable an email one-time passcode for guests. It's a support for users that just have a mailbox and any mail provider, and I use this mailbox to send the one-time passcode that they can access my specific tenant. On the Teams platform, we already have seen that it's here, allow guest access in Teams, so I'm completely allowed to do that. Let's see in a moment on my getting started Teams. You see specifically here 3 guest accounts. So let's take a look on the Azure Active Directory how they look like. So we go here to the user section, we add the filter user type, and say, for example here, guest, add the filter, and we see the 3 specific users in that case. The WAWeb user is just a user that have a mailbox on a provider. That's my example here. Then on the other hand, I have another Office 365 user in that case, and on this part I have a Gmail account. For the Gmail implementation or other like Facebook, you need to configure specifically the external identities federation I already have prepared this. If you see here, specifically the social identity providers, I have done the configuration for Facebook and for Google in a moment. So how the invitation process runs, basically that's quite easy. To say here, I want to have a user. Okay, I want to have it as a guest. And in the background, Azure Active Directory sends out the guest invite to this specific user. So, do a short while, wait short. We see in a moment what's happening in Azure Active Directory. Let's see for Kim. And we see, okay, this is a user type guest. And let's gather more information about this user. We see the invitation actually is not accepted. So if we go through this account right now, we need to accept exactly this invitation. I go to this webmail provider. I'm here logged in as the other user. Just log out. So here, Kim Burns at .ch. And we see here the invitation already is there to go through. So we just accept the invitation. We open it. And now the OTP token sent is in place. So we send the code. And after a short while, it should appear, and specifically here in this account. So I take this and I go back to sign in to the specific user. So now I need to accept the permissions that I am allowed to sign in, and it's allowed to read my name, email address and photo. So this gives me now the access to Microsoft Teams. So I just use the web app instead, and I'm able to access the Teams application in that case. Takes a short while for the setup, and I see where I already have access to it. That's basically the idea of a user account that has just a mailbox in place. On the other hand, obviously we can say, okay, I want to enter Teams from another account. I want to use my Google account. I get redirected to Google. Then it applies that I need more information. In that case, I obviously need to provide a multi-factor authentication, because this was the policy in our conditional access rule. So I need to register my account for this topic for multi-factor authentication. That's done. I need to approve it. Click next. I'm registered for MFA and I can access. Obviously we also have the option to come into that with a normal Office 365 account in a partner organization that works the same as we have seen it right now, that we get redirected to our organization and we get the access to the Teams application. Obviously there are a lot of different stuff that we need to think about the lifecycle management and all of that stuff. We see this in the session tomorrow to give you a better idea how to manage specific these accounts. The next point is that we jump over to the dynamic group memberships. So let's go to the groups, and we see here I already prepared a dynamic group for this research and development team in the background. So if we go here, we see that here I'm not accessible for that because I'm not in this attribute list. Let's take a short list here of these attributes, what I'm searching for, and specific for this dynamic membership rules. So what I'm doing is I want to have all users that have in user department research and development. So I can also validate this against my user. For example, my account, I'm already logged in. See in there, you see the few details that's not working. If I'm going to search one guy of this department, I also can select it and can double check it. So in this team, Irvine Sires should be inside of the members list. Let's check it short here on the manage team side. We go to research and development, and we see that the 2 users with the attributes field are in the specific team. That's a great opportunity to automatically add new members to the specific team, specific for organization teams or project teams where I fill up specific attributes in Azure Active Directory. We just talk a short while about the managing of messaging policies, which we also have a specific part in this virtual series. So messaging policies are used basically to control with which chat and channel messaging features are available to users in Microsoft Teams. For example, users can delete sent messages, edit sent messages. That user control the read receipts? Are you allowed to use gifs, memes, stickers, and so on? So that's the basic stuff where you control your messaging policies inside of your infrastructure. That's also a great way, and it's just a short intro what we really can control over the messaging part in Microsoft Teams. So after talking about all the technical stuff, the overview of Microsoft Teams today, the certification for the Microsoft Teams part is the exam MS700, Managing Microsoft Teams. You will get all the information on the docsmicrosoft.com platform learn, and for the exam MS700. Just a sneak preview for tomorrow. Tomorrow we really go to the implementation of security and governance. As already mentioned about lifecycle management for Microsoft Teams. It includes also the management of guest access, deeper than today, because today was really the overview section. How we can implement governance for Microsoft Teams, and implementing security features for Microsoft Teams itself to really improve your security of your environment. We have 2 learning paths on Microsoft Learn. The one is called Manage Team Collaboration with Microsoft Teams, and the second one is Upgrade to Microsoft Teams. I really highly recommend it to you, in specific when you want to apply for the certification for the MS700. This gives you deep intro and digging into the material and hands-on specifically on the different topics, and is as an addition for this virtual series what we are in for. At the end of this module, allow me to really thank you that you attend this module today, and have a nice time, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. I hope our participants will really benefit from it. Also, as an additional resource, let me remind you that this series on managing Microsoft Teams MS700 will also be available for you to watch on demand at aka.ms/enablevts and aka.ms/training center. In fact, you can find more virtual training series available for your on-demand consumption there. Thank you to all the participants for joining us. Hope you enjoyed today's session. We'll see you again tomorrow. Goodbye.